Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of In This Issue, with a feature I'm calling Pulled from the Bins, where I pick a comic from my collection and I do a little deep dive on it while showing off the art and talking a bit about the context surrounding it. This time we're looking at Adventure Comics number 425 from DC Comics, published in 1972. Cover date is January 1972. They did that. It's like a slash. Well, this just says January, but the actual release date was October 6th, 1972. That was January was the point where they would pull it off the newsstands. Other books on the stands or around this time when it was released include Justice League of America number 103, Partridge Family number 15, Iron Man number 54, The Incredible Hulk, number 159, The Demon, number 4, Swamp Thing, number 2, and Conan the Barbarian, number 22. So that's just like a little snapshot of the market at that time. And thanks, as always, to the invaluable website Mike's Amazing World of Comics for the on-sale information here. I just want to give them a shout out because that is a great website and you should check it out. Dig around in there. It always helps me kind of, get a little extra context clues for things that I'm interested in looking at. Anyway, Adventure Comics number 425 here. This has a cover price of 20 cents, but I probably paid somewhere between 50 cents and $1 for this one. As you can see, it's pretty beat up. A lot of, cover creases, some like little shredding on the cover here in the corners. It's still a great reader's copy. I can't remember the specific shop or show that I got it at, but it was definitely in the discount bin, maybe at a Frankenstein's Comic Swap or something like that. But again, it's a fantastic reader's copy. All the art looks just fine. The cover's a little dinged up, but, as long as there's no mold or, pee or whatever on them, I'm pretty happy with it for things like this. Now, this comic, it turns out that it has a bunch of great art in it. I may have just seen the cover and been like, hey, let me grab it. But it's got a lot of cool creators in it, as we will get into. Adventure Comics ran for about 50 years in its original incarnation and was largely an anthology title. Originally a humor comic named New Comics, and then renamed New Adventure Comics, and then just Adventure Comics for most of its run. Though, as you can see here, there's a blurb that says, all new. It wasn't an official title change, as we will see in the indicia. Previously, Adventure was the home of Supergirl, but with this issue, they break her out into her own title, and they try to focus on other newer heroes and even non-superhero concepts. Although very quickly we do see the title become home to existing names like The Spectre, Aquaman, Superboy, Dial H for Hero, and the Legion of Superheroes. Near the end of the 503 issue run, it changes from a typical floppy comic to a digest-sized comic for the last 13 or so issues, where it would get racked next to the Archie digests at the supermarket checkouts. And, you kind of see that with this issue and with the digest change and with changing it over to Superboy and the different shifts in frequency. This issue, it becomes a bi-monthly title. They're basically just trying to keep it going, trying to find new sales, trying to get new readers all the time, but they, you kind of get an idea that they are just relentlessly trying whatever they can to make it sell. The editor for this issue was the legendary editor Joe Orlando. And, he did a lot of stuff with DC and EC both. There's lots of great stories and art published under the Adventure Comics banner. So, we might just come back to this title eventually. I'm a big fan of the, Dial H for Hero era. That was early 80s when I was sort of first picking up a lot of these things. This one came out before I was born, and it looks like it, I guess. But anyway, so let's talk about the credits and all that kind of good stuff before we kind of get into the stories themselves. We've got a cover art by Michael Kaluta, who was kind of a young Turk at this time, and of course, would later become sort of an old man of comics as we all sort of age and die, but become a legendary creator. But this was just one of his sort of typical, like, crazy perspective, really interesting designs for a cover. He would do a lot of really neat covers for DC around this time. With the first story is Wings of Jealous Gods, which has got a script by Lynn Marron, who I'm not aware of previously, but it's got great art by Alex Toth. Prior Warning, which is a very short story in here, with art by Frank Redondo, who it turns out is Nestor Redondo's brother. And Sword of the Dead, script and art by Gil Kane. And Captain Fear, which is a comic which is written by Robert Kanigher and has art by Alex Niño. And it's one of Alex Niño's very early works for DC. He had done a few other things already, but this was pretty early in his run of doing stuff for DC. So we got some really cool ads in here. I might point them out a little bit here and there, but definitely pay attention to the sort of the vibe, I guess, is the best way to put it. This is a comic from 1972, so we're gonna encounter some coloring of non-white characters and some things like this BB gun ad, which is like toxic masculinity in a nutshell. This was a different world, and just fair warning about all that. Nothing too egregious, I don't think, although the first story does have some like unfortunate sort of pidgin English kind of stuff. But I think like at least the Captain Fear story kind of goes a little ways towards kind of mitigating some of that, because it is more of a that character does become sort of a scourge of the white man, which is kind of interesting. Anyway, so we have here this Wings of Jealous Gods, which is a story about a pretty crappy dude who is like a cowboy, famed professional rodeo showman, Chad Hammond. His story about his strange quest starts here, high in the frigid reaches of the Himalayas, within the roofless ruins of an ancient temple. And Chad Hammond here he's a guy he's very ruthless. He ends up, no spoilers, plenty of spoilers actually, because we're going to go through the whole thing, but he kills everybody, he comes into contact with, basically, either on purpose or on accident. But you see here, like, this is a pretty fun layout. On the first page, you've got this crazy perspective looking up from the feet of the main character, and this guy Juan T, again, like kind of goofy sort of names and such for these characters, but really cool, sort of like looking up at them, and they're flipped upside down, and then you see the temple ruins in the background. Like, lots of really cool stuff from Alex Toth here, and of course plenty of his typical sort of just adeptly spotted blacks. He uses dark, full black areas to kind of move the page along, and the framing device, literally a framing device of the image, kind of gets inset into the panels around it, and then also some of the lettering is breaking out of the interior panels into the frame, which I just think is really cool. But anyway, so he's looking for some winged horses, fabled hawk horses, and so he basically, you know, um, threatens these guides to help him find these, sacred animals, which they don't want to do, of course, but because he's threatening to kill them, they do take him up there, and he sees a foal, a young horse, and tries to catch it, and then just out of the sky comes like a kind of a Pegasus sort of winged horse to attack him, which uh, he then shoots with he empties his gun into and kills the older horse, and then he's like, hey, come on, help me get this horse out of here, and all his guides are like, we're all gonna be killed, you're gonna be killed, we're leaving you, go screw yourself, but so he basically like takes this horse out of the Himalayas. uh he's chased by adult flying horses. He hears the horses killing his guides, which he doesn't actually see, but then we have a very cool panel where, in the middle of the night, he's kind of going down the hill, and we see the shadows of their corpses kind of in the foreground here. And then, he brings the foal back to the temple, and he kind of confronts the guy who was like, oh, there's no such thing as these horses. And, he basically threatens the guy, that I'm going to take this foal and take her to the U.S. And so the guy like ends up going with him to help raise the horse, which is, whatever. This is the sort of Twilight Zone logic anyway. But he makes a little note here that the hawk horse needs rare herbs for food and special meats, which, in this kind of short story, it's always kind of a, you're gonna that's gonna come back around, right? But yeah, again, we've got some really cool panels, cool spot blacks to direct the eye, push you across the page, and then what Toth decides that he's gonna like zoom out on or zoom in on is always kind of interesting to me. But so anyway, they take the horse back to America. It becomes a popular and successful racehorse, which means that he doesn't want it to be a hawk horse anymore. He just wants it to be a racehorse. And so whenever it starts to grow little wings, he's like, I'm going to have them cut off, which, Wan Ti, he's like, okay, actually, no, you can't do that. I'm going to kill you. So then he kills him. The Chad kills Wan Ti, and then he burns the stable and pretends that the horse is dead, and then he goes into seclusion with the horse. He decides to take the horse for a ride now that it has big wings. And of course, the white stallion from the Himalayas is waiting for them in the sky. Check out these cool panels, though. Look at that. There's like some really cool clouds. They're high as hell up. And they fly for a day and a night. And then he's like, oh, cool. Like, maybe we can get to the meadow and I can get out of here. But they drop him into a nest of needle-toothed foals, which this is sort of the first time where you're like, these horses have very sharp teeth, and you realize that, oh, they actually eat human flesh, and they're going to eat Chad, and we get, him tumbling into their nest to they have like a little bird's nest. And, it does say the ancient Greeks told of the winged horse Pegasus, and of mares of Diomedes, which ate human flesh, which was, that was one of the trials of Hercules, if you are familiar with that kind of stuff. Anyway, now Chad Hammond has found the origin of both stories, and then, that's the end. It's just a little short and sweet, just a few pages, but we get some great art. and really fun coloring. I mean, aside from there's like some, there's a few like, there's like some sort of orange and bright yellow coloration on the guys from the mountains. But other than that, it's like I do love this sort of not completely representational style of coloring. This is a big thing for me. I love that. We also get some ads for where was it? We had a Charles Atlas style ad, but it's Joe Whiter's bodybuilding booklet, and a classic ad for sea monkeys. Which it's a bowl full of happiness. Anyway, the next story is there's no script, there's no story credit online that I could find for this one for prior warning, but it is, again, it's drawn by Frank Redondo, who is the lesser known brother of Nestor Redondo. But it's it's a solid little kind of 2-pager where some aliens come down to Earth and they're like, hey, we're aliens and we're gonna be cool, we don't want to hurt you, we're gonna send you our picture of what we look like, and then secretly they're like, oh, we're gonna kill everybody on Earth, but somehow they know that they're up to no good because apparently the aliens all look like space Nazis, including like this guy looks like Hitler, and they're all wearing, actual SS uniforms and stuff. It doesn't make any sense. It's not very good, but it is what it is. This is probably the weakest, story in the definitely the weakest story in the bunch, but whatever. We get some cool ads for superhero stick-ons. These are like sort of color forms for your walls, which is kind of funny because they make these kind of things now, and they weren't a big thing for the last like 30 or 40 years for sure, but like now I feel like this is a kind of thing you might see on Instagram ads or whatever. There's also an ad for the coming of Shazam, quote unquote, Captain Marvel, with art by CC Beck, the creator of Captain Marvel. And this is when, DC had successfully driven Captain Marvel comics out of existence, and they're like, hey, you know what? We own this now. Let's bring it back, and let's get the creator back. And the new comics are, honestly, what I've read of them, not that great, but it's cool that they were trying to do that, and it's cool that there's a house ad for this, which I haven't seen. Coming in December, DC's Christmas gift to you, Shazam is coming. Say it, Billy Batson. Say the magic word Shazam, and you become the world's mightiest mortal. Watch out, Superman. Here comes the original Captain Marvel. Is very funny because that was sort of the basis on which they argued that Captain Marvel shouldn't exist, was that he's too much like Superman. Anyway, Sword of the Dead after that is a very cool set of art from Gil Kane. It's another kind of very basic story. A lot of these kind of read like inventory stories that maybe they just had sort of sitting around. I can't really say for sure, but this one might be one of those. It's a cool kind of fantasy-ish story. Sword of the Dead, and then there's this guy, Ivlig, which, sort of looks like evil. I don't know. But he's riding with death. He's an evil guy. Basically, there's not much to this either, but lots of cool art. And he's, Gil Kane is kind of in his Ring of the Nibelung style art, lots of kind of these helms with filigree and capes and so on. And this guy, Evlig, he shows up at some house. He basically, they imply that he basically, rapes and kills the wife and children. Who knows if he, was a pedophile or whatever, but he basically like kills everybody there, and he looks very excited about it. He rides off. The guy who shows up, the father and husband, is like, of course he's shattered. He buries his family, and then he's like, I gave up my sword. This is very much like Unforgiven, typical trope kind of thing, but it's well drawn. I would say, like some of these panels are cooler than others, but lots of cool kind of stuff going on here. Anyway, John the Repentant is what they call him at first for all of one page, and then it says John the Repentant was once John the Gaunt, the kingdom's greatest champion. So, you know, Gil Kane is doing like so much shorthand here. It's pretty silly, actually, almost for this level of story. But so he chases down, the mad dog, the rabid dog that killed his family. It turns out to be Evlig, and they square off. They recognize each other from some past adventure that doesn't exist, and they basically Evlig like kills him right away. It seems like, but he puts a lance into him. But then there's all of a sudden, actually not even of a sudden is the text here, but there's a play of light, and John the Gaunt's figure rises, sword in hand, and he strikes down Evlig, and then he's like, okay, now I'm gonna die. But then he actually notices that he's already dead. He's looking down at his own corpse. Pretty fun stuff there. The final story in this comic is the Captain Fear comic, which is basically Captain Fear is a Carib Indian, and it's sort of set in the 1850s, so it's like high pirate time, and basically these guys are fishing the waters of their land, and some Spanish ships show up, shoot at them, try to enslave them. Pharaoh's father gets killed, and they fight back, kill some of the Spaniards. They escape or not. The Spaniards capture everybody. You see some really interesting, like Alex Niño is one of those guys who has a very interesting style. He did a kind of a thing where, the layouts are cool. Like he plays with scale and perspective, and also sort of like resolution at a time when that's not really like a thing, because he'll do like a thing where he kind of zooms in on people and features and forms, and he gets like almost like blown out, like as if it's dithered or something. It's like bitmapping. But this is just him. Like this is how he like zooms in. It's very psychedelic, and the forms kind of become more abstract. And you see like here, this panel down here has elements that are coming up and going behind other panels, and then in front of, for even more other panels. So really like interesting kind of approach to both image making and storytelling and layouts and stuff. Most of the other stuff is more sort of typical layouts, but you see his sort of abstract forms in the forest here, and then this sort of zoom in psychedelia informed kind of graphic approach with these close-ups. So anyway, this is a really cool panel. So anyway, the Indians, they free themselves from the Spaniards who have gotten drunk, and they kill everybody, take off in the Spanish galleon, and then immediately the Spanish galleon is basically like destroyed by a storm, and then they are picked up by I think actually maybe just Pharaoh is picked up by a I guess Chinese freighter, and he ends up fighting the captain for command of the ship just because, and then he immediately just kills the guy and takes over. And this is the beginning of the the legend of Captain Fear, which is what he calls himself immediately. It's very shorthand storytelling, because again, these are like 6-page stories or whatever. But yeah, so this is like the first appearance of Captain Fear. And, then we get editorial, which I'll sort of get into here. We get an ad for these. This is kind of an ad that used to show up a lot back in the day, where it's like, oh, you can send off like $1.50 or whatever for a big box of toy soldiers or toys or whatever, tank toys or whatever. Then there's an actual Charles Atlas ad and, an Aurora model kit ad, which, whatever. Just to dig into the editorial, there's some kind of fun information there. And it sort of outlines a little bit of what I was talking about earlier. Changes have been made in Adventure Comics, as you can see with this issue. We have decided to try something new, and that is to move our headline feature, Supergirl, into her own book, giving her the longer stories you called for. Then, to take over the new Adventure Comics, we have called in some of our best writers and artists to come up with new features, new concepts. Should they become popular, they will remain or get their own feature. If you readers dislike it, the feature will be dropped and another one started. Every writer and artist has ideas that they have been waiting to try, characters they've been sure you fans would like to read. So came about Captain Fear by Robert Kanigher and Alex Niño. Bob, one of the original greats in comics and creator of a dozen famous heroes like Sergeant Rock, Rose and Thorn, Viking Prince, among others. And a newcomer to DC Comics, Alex Niño. Anyway, this is a comic strip meant for action and high adventure like you've never seen before. We think you'll like the idea, and we hope you will tell us what you think. The new Adventure Comics era will be a constantly shifting creation where we can explore the new worlds of comics, the new ideas that exist. Where will the next thought come from? Perhaps beyond the farthest star? Or beneath the endless oceans? Perhaps in the exotic plains of the African veldt? Or the asphalt jungles of our busy cities? Or maybe, who knows? What kind of characters will appear in Adventure Comics? The old mixed with the new? Original concepts, new ideas from the most creative talents we can find, be it science fiction, mystery, horror, or whatever? If it is good, if it is exciting, if it has adventure, then it can appear in Adventure Comics. And, so yeah, anyway, Joe Orlando is basically like, please write to us and tell us what you like. Because as we know, sales were super important, obviously, but if people were engaged in the letter columns, that gave them a sort of a metric also. Anyway, this has been an episode of In This Issue and a pulled from the bins Adventure Comics 425 deep dive. Thanks for watching.